Hello, everyone. It is Sunday, November 14th, 6:04 p.m. And I'm doing a video kind of late today, but it's dark out, and honestly, what else can you do besides make YouTube videos, watch YouTube videos, and read books, right? The darkness is kind of depressing, but it's also an opportunity to, I guess, travel more internally, if you will, and explore the introverted side of life, which I feel like I'm, believe it or not, a little bit more introverted than extroverted normally anyway. But it's a good time to read. It's a good time to gain knowledge and meditate and pray without, the distraction of having to be busy outdoors. So anyway, today I want to talk about a super important topic. Well, honestly, I feel it's super important. Saint Hildegard felt that it was super important, and modern science today is starting to understand the importance of it. And what this is, I guess we can just call it what the modern term calls it. It's this idea of biophotons, I guess. Biophotons, biophotons. And basically, what it is, it's the science of light, human light. And it's really a fascinating topic. I had never heard of this before until I started reading into St. Hildegard in her visions. In this book is called Hildegard of Bingens, and I guess this was probably before she was canonized because she's obviously been around for a while, but she was canonized recently by Pope Benedict. And I think this book was written in the early 2000s. But anyway, it's her spiritual remedies as written down by Dr. Wygard Strello. And it's basically compiles her different writings and her different visions and kind of breaks them down for us and relates them to modern science and things like that. And it's really terrific, and I feel that his work is extraordinarily important because it points out what modern medicine is lacking, and that is the spiritual aspect to healing is almost more important, I would argue, than the actual physical part of healing. The medications, the remedies, the physical remedies, things like that. The spiritual really guides the healing process. So if you are not healed and if you are not in tune spiritually, your ailments are going to keep manifesting. They're going to keep coming back. And St. Hildegard does a really good job of documenting this. She refers to this balance, if you will, the spiritual balance as vices and virtues, and she points out 35 of them. So in the beginning of this book, there's a chart. For example, number 1, the negative force or the vice would be material love. The positive force or the virtue would be heavenly love. And the organ system or physical disorder that manifests if obviously you're imbalanced and you have a love for material over a heavenly love would be eyes, inflammation, infection, and arthritis. And then she has symbols of how she sees them in her visions: fire, embers, worms, and snakes. And that's just simplified, breaking it down. But it's important to understand the underlying causes. And what she's saying is most of the time the underlying causes are in fact spiritual. You're somehow spiritually out of balance. Whether it be you have an anger problem or you have a problem with gluttony, if you have a problem with sexual impurity, all these things have effects on your body. And it really reminds me of a book that I was recommended to me called "The Body Keeps the Score," and it's strictly secular book written by modern scientists or psychologists, I guess, but talking about how trauma affects the body, whereas the body will be affected, very physically by traumatic experiences. And he does a lot of case studies on veterans with PTSD, which is why it was recommended to me. And I am also writing my own book. I have been for about a year now, and I took a lot of time off from it because I needed to take a step back from it. But it's very heavy on it's geared towards combat veterans. For most, I mean, anybody can benefit from it, but it's really geared toward encouraging combat veterans to see that once they leave the military, their fight, so to speak, is not over. There's a whole nother battle. There's a whole spiritual battle waging, and I really do feel that this is really off topic, but veterans have a hard time adjusting in our modern day society because our modern day society is not friendly towards warrior ethos, and they really do feel like they don't fit in, they're out of place, they don't have a purpose. And my whole goal with my book is to shed light on the fact that no, God loves his warriors. You do have a purpose. You have a spiritual battle to fight. This is how you fight it. This is who your enemy is. This is who your comrades are. And as part of that book, there's a big section on healing from PTSD. So that book has, The Body Keeps Count, has been a tremendous help to me. But more importantly, spiritual healing. So I'm very interested in St. Hildegard's work. I'm very interested in, people who do talk about spiritual healing and how that translates into physical ailments and things like that. And again, along the same lines, it reminds me of a statistic I heard just about first responders in general. First responders are some astronomical number, I'll have to get the correct number, times more likely to develop organ cancer than the average person. And it's because they're constantly seeing this trauma, they're constantly under stress. And all that takes a toll on the body. It turns into different ailments. And so a big push, there was a lady, I forget, I think she's out in California, but she's opened all these centers now basically for first responders that after they go through some sort of traumatic experience, they can go to this place and kind of have a retreat and deal with these things and have different therapies. I think she's more Eastern, so there's probably like acupuncture and things like that, yoga, the whatever. But the point is this: the fact that we are recognizing that this is a spiritual problem is a step in the right direction, regardless of how it's being portrayed. And most of the time, it's the Eastern mysticism, the Hindu, the Buddhism type ideas that are showing through. But regardless, understanding that it's a spiritual problem is the first step. Okay. Obviously, as Christians, we subscribe more to this idea of vices and virtues because our whole religion is about overcoming self, a constant struggle against the self, a constant struggle against anger and gluttony and bitterness of heart and instability, lethargy, and all kinds of discord. So it's all very fascinating to me. I have taken a big interest in it. But today I want to talk about something that I find more relevant to everyone and more relevant to our current bat flu situation, if you will, and the solution to that and the effect that that's having on people. And I think the key, I don't know, this is largely a hypothesis, so maybe I'm not going to say that because I don't want to influence the information I'm giving you, but I'm going to read what St. Hildegard said. I'm going to read what modern science is saying to confirm what St. Hildegard already knew, not because she was a scientist, but because she had visions from God. And I want to bring forth a theory that I have. So I'm going to start here. In this vision, now he has a bunch of them compiled in here, but these particular sets of visions where she talks about the relationship between body and soul comes from her book, Scivia, Scivia, I think it's how it's pronounced, which I also have, but I'm just going to read it in here because he gives his own input and it just makes it easier to read. Also a great book though, so I would recommend picking up that because it's the original source of a lot of her teachings and, a lot of people who wrote about her teachings and whatnot. So this is relationship between body and soul, and this is vision 4. Every one of us is a child of God. Our life begins when the soul, represented by a golden kite, enters the body in the mother's womb. Heaven and earth, the invisible and the visible, come together and a new human being is born. Our divine soul looks like a golden kite that descends from a blue sky. Both gold and blue signify the royal power of God. The entire universe vibrates in gold and blue to show the presence of God's energy in his creation. No creature, whether visible or invisible, lacks this royal life energy, writes Hildegard. In this colorful illumination, the golden kite has four corners, which represent the four directions and the four cosmic elements: fire, air, water, and earth. We burn with the cosmic fire to sustain our vital life energy. Breathe the air to provide oxygen for the burning process of our metabolism. Drink water for the humors and the body juices, and use earth to build bones and ligaments out of 45 different minerals. If we look closer, the four-cornered kite is divided into three parts, symbolizing the three divine personalities of God, Christ, and the Holy Spirit. Together, 4 and 3 are the 7 divine cosmic forces that are the essence of our life center, the power that keeps us going and the center of our well-being. As long as we stay in tune with this energy, we are in harmony with God, the universe, and nature. So that's kind of a little intro. And this is really what I want to get to is this part. Fireballs, symbols of life energy. Hildegard's concept of fireballs as a symbol of life energy reveals the deepest secrets of creation. The same light energy that started creation on the first day is equivalent to the radiance of God, who brings the macro and the microcosms into being. Hildegard calls this energy lucidia materia, lucid energy that penetrates the physical matter, turbulenta materia. The transmission of the divine life energy throughout the universe carries information to all creatures over all time and space over long distances. Normal life is impossible without this divine energy, or radiation, that is present in human beings as well as in plants, animals, and minerals. According to Hildegard, no creature, whether visible or invisible, lacks the spiritual life energy. The existence of a cosmophysical life force that rules macro and microcosmic processes can be understood only since the biophysical discovery of light particles. The scientist and professor of quantum physics, Fritz Albert Popp of the Institution of Biophysics in Germany, discovered the high energy quanta and called it biophoton, biophoton, a type of radiation that is absorbed by all living organisms. Studies show that all life processes are stimulated by biophotons, which penetrate the intercellular matrix of the DNA, our genetic code. The DNA of the cell regulates all life processes and relays thousands of bits of metabolic information with the help of this biophotonic language. The entire body speaks and understands it. This language, the whispering of the stars and the whispering of the cells, is characteristic of all processes in any nature of macro and microorganisms. To understand the body's ability to function, let us examine a symphony orchestra. A harmonic sound is possible only when the conductor, the soloists, and the different instrumentalists speak and understand the same language of music. Harmony is not possible if a single musician makes a mistake. Divine energy operates in the same way. When all creatures speak and understand the language, information is transferred with 100% efficiency. The transfer of digital information bridges the gap between God and his creation. Hildegard's vision of fireball projectiles carrying the bioinformation to all living cells goes beyond the knowledge of her time, and also of today's dogmatic medicine. It opens a window for a new medicine and greater understanding of life in the future. The divine cell information therapy, and you're going to see why they do not want us to know about this. Every creature in the sun, moon, stars, plants, and animals, and even minerals vibrate in the divine radiance and communicate with one another from distances of hundreds and thousands of miles. Disease is therefore a result of misinformation and a lack of biophotons. Negative feedback in living cells creates molecular chaos, which is responsible for the growth of malignant tumors, inflammatory diseases, and immune impairment like autoaggression. Healing occurs when the divine life energy re enters the impaired molecular DNA with the help of natural remedies that transmit biophotons. Herbs and plants, animals, and even precious stones are able to interact with our human cells via biophotons from their biosphere. Spiritual healing occurs when you lift your hands and ask God for help, pray, meditate, or go to a place with strong natural radiation. And I would add in there, I don't know who this guy is, being in a state of grace so that we are not blocking God's healing energy. All these methods are the secret of healing success with Hildegard's medicine, which is based on proper nutrition, natural healing remedies, and constant communication with God. The biocommunication with biophoton signals to all living creatures provides a scientific basis for Hildegard's medicine and for healthcare in the future. And that really is the crux of it right there. The biocommunication with biophoton signals to all living creatures, biophoton signal, to all living creatures provides a scientific basis for Hildegard's medicine and for healthcare in the future. And there's one more part of this I want to read before we make the switch to the science. Just as Hildegard predicted 800 years ago, genetic microbiology has discovered today that the single cell contains in its nucleus all the genetic information needed to create an entire new body. All characteristic human qualities of the body are stored in the blueprint of DNA. In more than 100,000 genes, a tremendous library of individual bits of information. The genetic material contains a master copy for the final new human being. Recent biophysics research shows how Hildegard's life energy concept can explain the way the cellular DNA matrix regulates all appropriate organs and builds the different nerve, bone, and tissue cells by speaking the language of the divine, which today we call optimal radiation via biophotons. So, these biophotons, or these light particles, if you will, are responsible for the communication and the homeostasis, or the balancing, the running smoothly of the entire body, of all the processes. That's how important they are. And so now we can switch over to the science, and I'll switch my screen over so you can read along with me. But you can also, I just picked an easy article by a Dr. Joe Dispenza. But I've read some of the harder research, and I'm not, just because it's big words and hard to understand, I'm not going to read those, like the peer-reviewed journals on here, but just know there's a lot of research on it, and you can look it up yourself if you want to. So let's read what he summarizes it as. All right, so I'll post this link below. Dr. Joe Dispenza. I don't really know who he is, but I like this article. Biophotons, the light in our cells. And just how biblical is this? I mean, we're constantly talking about be the lights in the darkness, the lights of Christ. I mean, all kinds of, it's just a constant reference to light. So there are trillions of cells that make up your body. For the moment, I want you to think about just one. That one cell is incredibly busy. In just the last second, there were over 100,000 chemical reactions that occurred in this cell. Now step back and consider your body as a whole. The sheer volume of activity happening inside you at any given moment is almost incomprehensible. With so much information being processed all at once, it's fair to ask how it all works. The consensus in the scientific community used to focus on a mechanistic approach to explain the inner workings of your body. In this model, molecular reactions were assumed to follow a very linear formula. Essentially, event A produces event B, which produces event C, etc. In this theory, the human body isn't a fluid, ever-changing system, but a static one governed by a set of rigid rules where the law of attraction and repulsion of molecular charges run the show. In the 1970s, Fritz Popp and a team of researchers at the University of Marburg started doing work with biophotons. biophotons are considered ultra-weak photoemissions, UPEs. Pop's work has transformed our understanding of biophotons and the role they play. At one point, biophotons were considered byproducts of chemical reactions within our DNA. We now know that the biophotons emitted from our cells are highly coherent energy that may be responsible for the operation of our biological systems. You may have heard of a concept in nature called bioluminescence, where an animal, like a jellyfish or firefly, emits light. Biophotons fall into a similar realm of bioluminescence. However, the light coming from our bodies is very faint, invisible to the naked eye, and can only be measured with powerful scientific instruments. And I want to hit the pause button right there because I have read numerous private revelations that refer to this exact thing, as far as people in a state of grace, people who are very in union with God, emanating a light, being bright, in sin, people who are in sin being described as being dark. And so I think that's extraordinarily important. Research into biophotons raises some interesting possibilities. Russian scientist Sergei Maberov observed a batch of eggs from fish and frogs. He found that biophotons communicate in short, synchronized, quasi-periodic bursts. Previous experiments showed that fish eggs stored in a different location were able to sync their development through the use of biophotons. This idea of non-local communication between systems suggests that the light emitted from our cells may carry information which transcends current mainstream thought about how our biological systems work. Maberov likens this form of communication to the way error-correcting software sends binary data over a noisy, incoherent channel. The goal in Maberov's example is to restore the system to coherent working order, and that's important when you consider the potential for biophotons in the human body. Since all frequency carries information, it makes sense that the coherent energy from this light could organize and influence matter into a more healthy balance. I want to hit the pause button again right there. So let's just say for a second that global climate change and all this is in fact caused by humans, okay? Like they want to tell us it's caused by CO2 and all this stuff. My input would be this. Cutting CO2 and cutting fossil fuels is not going to do anything if we continue to live in the darkness of sin. What's going to regulate nature that we are called to be the head of and called to be stewards of is getting into a state of grace and restoring balance that way. Sin. If there's anything affecting nature and causing climate chaos, it's sin, not CO2. But who am I? Remember, coherence refers to a highly structured and organized frequency. Think of a drum circle where all the players are working in the same rhythm and beat. The music is synchronized, organized, and easy on the ears. That's coherence. Now picture a few of those drummers playing at different speed or putting an emphasis on the wrong note. The music is jumbled and much harder to understand or enjoy. That's incoherence. Another Russian scientist named Peter Gerayev, placed DNA inside a quartz container and zapped it with a laser, a very coherent form of light. The DNA absorbed the light and stored it for up to 30 days inside a corkscrew-shaped spiral in an exact blueprint of light reflecting the DNA pattern. Even more interesting is that the spiral of light stayed in the same place even after the quartz container in the DNA had been removed. His work suggests some unknown force is holding the light in place. One possible explanation is that the DNA is responding to an external energy field. I wonder what that could be. This energy field is exchanging information with your cells in the form of light. In essence, our bodies are working as a giant antenna that is constantly sending and receiving signals from the field. This research even suggests that all living biological systems, including us, have the exact blueprint of our physical bodies stored in a field of light. We don't have to look too hard to find similar examples of this phenomenon elsewhere in nature. Experiments done years earlier with plants showed that when part of the leaf was cut off, a field of light, like the one from Gareev's test, still remained around the perimeter of the leaf for an extended period of time. The work into biophotons challenges our current understanding of cellular processes. In the traditional Newtonian model, the chemical reactions in our cells are essentially runners in a relay race, handing off pieces of information at a specific time and place, just like runners pass a baton to one another. If the research into biophotons proves correct, then our cells behave much more like a symphony. Picture a conductor using his hands and wand to send cues about whether or not to be louder or quieter, faster or slower. The musicians respond with small adjustments that keep the piece flowing smoothly, which cues the conductor, which cues the musicians, and so on. Viewed in this way, our cells have more of a symbiotic relationship to each other and with the world around them. According to Pop's research, the symphony of cells in our bodies sends and receives messages faster than the speed of light, which further challenges the old Newtonian model of how our bodies operate. The pace of this interaction means it's a quantum phenomenon and needs to be evaluated differently. Indeed, the relatively new field of information biology is built on the belief that cells are guided by some external field of information and are not exclusively regulated by molecular charges. Now, whether or not the biophotons in our cells are responding to an energy field or something else entirely is still being investigated. However, it does appear that we have the ability to influence the light coming from our bodies. In a recent study, 8 volunteers were placed in a darkened room and asked to visualize a bright light. The participants were monitored with light detectors that picked up an aura of light particles coming from the right side of their brains. In a sense, they were enhancing light. What does this mean? Well, for us Catholics, it means that our prayers have the ability to be measured scientifically now. That's what it means. We know that our cells emit light and that this light is constantly sending and receiving information. We also know that we have at least some ability to affect this light. If this is true, then we have access to the control center of our minds and bodies. And if we have access and influence, then we have the ability to change ourselves at the most fundamental level by enhancing our light. In our advanced workshops that are conducted around the world, we have actually measured significant positive changes in this invisible field of light with our participants, and it seems to directly correlate with changes in their health. Wow. So let's unpack that for a minute here. So, if there is anything that is bad for the current business, so to speak, the current business model of society, it is this information. The fact that there is now seemingly a scientific way to measure prayer and meditation, to measure light being transmitted, to measure information in the form of light being transmitted not only internally, but externally and being received externally, is profound. It is absolutely profound. Now, obviously, for reasons I don't have to tell you, this is never going to be mainstream unless something drastically changes in our world. But under the current regime of powers that be, this isn't going to get out. So that's why you're going to have to read about it in obscure websites called like drjoedispenza.com. But there are many, many peer-reviewed scientific articles in journals saying just this, but in more complicated terms. Now, I want to just put forth a theory. Another interesting thing I found out through all this is that this light, these biophotons, directly affect the aging process. Which really got me thinking, because I have been running my mouth now for months about how people who seemingly received the solution to our problems look like they've aged 20 years. I mean, really. Now, I don't know, maybe it's stress, maybe it's somehow not related, but I'm telling you what, and I'm not the only person noticing this. And it got me thinking of, this mRNA and this RNA, and all this stuff, and we don't know what we're doing. So even if it's not nefarious, like even if the scientists behind this are good people and trying to save the planet and save the human race or whatever, we still don't know the effects. And since we don't know, we know so little about even the communication of cells. Obviously, I mean, we're just learning about biophotons and how they regulate things, and how they're the conductor of the orchestra and things like this. What effect are these cell changing or cell manipulation, the cell manipulation, I guess is what it is, gene therapy treatments having on biophotons? And is this why we're hearing things like people feeling like maybe they are possessed or whatever? And I'm sure they are. Like, I'm sure that's a big part of it. I'm sure the evil one is absolutely behind this and using this and using this as an avenue to get into people's lives. But what if there's also a more verifiable way to prove that? To prove that this manipulation, this gene manipulation, is affecting biophotons, which in turn is affecting the way that God communicates with us. That's profound. That's something worth looking into. Obviously, I don't know how you would go about looking into this. If I had more time to dedicate to it, I probably would. But all these things that they're finding, and suspecting are in these injections. Not only are they retraining cells, or training cells, they're also thinking that there's something called graphene in them, which is a metal, or, and they've also found metal. Even Japan banned a bunch of these batches because there was metal in them. And what effect is that having on the biophotons' ability to communicate with each other and with the divine, with God, with the Holy Spirit? What effect is this having? These are the questions I have, and I think they're worth asking. And is that the blindness? Is that the people's inability to understand the big picture, to understand the spiritual, to understand how things work? Is that the blind spot? Is this are factors in our environment? Is the poisoning of our food? Is the poisoning of our water? Or, the poisoning of our soil? The GMO, all this stuff, is that having an effect on these biophotons? I would be interested to know. Alright, and to wrap up this video, before I end it, I do want to read a little bit of scripture, and this would be Friday's first reading. So this last Friday, the 12th, first reading, it was from the book of Wisdom, Wisdom 13, 1 through 9. And it's so astonishingly accurate to our current situation, which is we have reverted back to paganism, only we're calling it science. And it's this whole getting lost in the creation while ignoring the creator concept. And we're about to see what God has to say about that in the book of Wisdom. All men were by nature foolish, who were in ignorance of God, and who from the good things seen did not succeed in knowing him who is, and from studying the works did not discern the artisan. But either fire or wind, or the swift air, or the circuit of the stars, or the mighty water, or the luminaries of heaven, the governors of the world, they considered gods. Now if out of joy in their beauty they thought them gods, let them know how far more excellent is the Lord than these. For the original source of beauty fashioned them. Or if they were struck by their might and energy, let them from these things realize how much more powerful is he who made them. For from the greatness and the beauty of created things, their original author by analogy is seen. But yet for these the blame is less, for they indeed have gone astray perhaps, though they seek God and wish to find him. For they search busily among his works, but are distracted by what they see, because the things seen are fair. But again, not even these are pardonable. For if they so far succeeded in knowledge that they could speculate about the world, how did they not more quickly find its Lord? that's where I'm going to leave it for tonight. Let me know what you think. Obviously, I'm not a scientist, but I do know. I do understand this, enough of the spiritual to understand that it all works together. There is no healing without God. The soul is the rider of the horse, and the horse is the body. And that is so true. And I would totally, again, recommend picking this book up or picking up any of the books. I have a couple other ones, but they sound a little bit new agey at first, to be honest, and I was kind of turned off by this one in particular. But once I got past all the energy talk and was able to put my biases aside, I was able to see that it's not new agey because it is very rooted in God, and it is very rooted in the virtues and the vices. And that's what it all comes down to. Whereas the New Age movement will tell you that there is no vices, there is none of that, and, whatever. So it's still very rooted in the message of the cross, picking up your cross, overcoming yourself. And that is the key to healing. So, anyway, I hope y'all have a great night and a great week. And Joan of Arc Media out.